all for coming out today. If you want to move closer to, hear better, feel free. I hate that we were without power and had to reschedule it because it really was going to be standing room only. I was very shocked in how many people signed up for it. So the reason, one, I'm Kelly Garrett. I'm the mayor of Lathrop Village, and I'm also the state director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. That's who's also helping to put this on. The reason why I decided to do this is because during the South Oakland County's Mayors Association has a dinner every single month. And we hosted it, we as the city of Lathrop Village hosted it. And we had this wonderful speaker there who was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was such a great conversation because it was something we as mayors have not talked about up in government. It's been for businesses and things like that. But this particular speaker also made us think outside the box about what DEI really is and what's become of it. So I got this brilliant idea to open it up to the community, and the community showed up. No, I'm just joking. Just for us to have this conversation because I really think until we bring our race issues and our diversity issues, inclusion issues to the table and actually really talk about them, they'll never change. So that's why we're here today, and I am very excited for the panel. I was trying to figure out who can I have that's going to make the panel really move and get some really good conversation. So first person I'm going to introduce is Nancy Quarles, who is, and after reading everybody's bio, I tried to cut it down. I've decided I'm going to introduce you all as how I know you. It's just easier. So Nancy has a plethora, should I say Dr. Quarles has a plethora of titles, has been in politics since 1995. Is that right? Maybe sooner?
There.
Okay. But right now, Nancy is the Oakland County Road Commissioner. She is the vice chair of the Road Commission, which is going to be a first for the first black woman on the Oakland County Road Commission, which I thought there might be an applause for that. She's also the chair of the Oakland County Democratic Party. And then she's also my friend. She is my mentor. She is the reason why I am where I'm at right now, because by far this is not where I was going. So if you're happy, give her a hug. If you're mad, talk to her about it. Thank you for coming, Nancy. Next, I have Jalen Jennings. He is the city councilman for the city of Lathrop Village. He has been such a great asset and such a great addition to the council. I am gonna have to read his because he did, I won't throw you under the bus because you know I was about to, right? When I got this. So, and I forgot to.
I had to throw it together.
You said what?
I had to throw it together.
Well, I forgot to bring my glasses. So as a professional, he is a public engagement and communication specialist for HNTB. Also, it's an infrastructure and engineering firm, and along with being on city council. You went to Tennessee State?
Yes.
I did not know that. Okay, sorry. You see what you don't know? And he has his Bachelor of Science degree in urban planning. And he is also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity.
Hey,
And-
Phi. 06. Sorry.
Would you like to go ahead, Nancy, do your part? I think that he is a member of several young professional organizations. He also serves on several ministries at his local church. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Next is Krista McClure. Now, it's quite funny how we met because we met through our profession first. And then, it's a lot of people that come up to me and they say, oh, I live in Lathrop Village. And I'm like, oh, okay. She truly does live in Lathrop Village. And one of the houses I absolutely adore also. So let me know if you're going to be moving somewhere else in the city sometime soon. Anyway.
You open up that road, I will be.
So next conversation, because if you've been here for our road conversation, you know we don't want to go down that road. No pun intended, especially being on Facebook right now. Krista is the founder and director of what is it? I'm sorry, I can't see it.
Detroit Parent Collective.
There it is, Detroit Parent Collective, which I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to explain what you do because I'm kind of just paraphrasing everything right now. Along with being you're still with Mothering Justice? No, okay, well, she used to be with Mothering Justice, and maybe she'll explain that too. But mostly she is a resident, and I wanted her perspective of living in the city of how you feel about this conversation. Thank you for joining us. And next, I know. Next, the person that started all this, the man that I was talking about who was at the actual mayor's dinner, is Mark Lee. And he did a fabulous job that we still received emails about it, and the mayors are talking about it because it's just something that we didn't do. So I will give you a brief introduction of, he is the president and CEO of the Lee Group, and it is an integrated marketing consulting firm focusing on marketing, branding, and communication solutions. And he's also a media contributor across various platforms. He holds MBA in marketing from Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University, and he has a bachelor's of business administration from EMU. Thank you for being here. But he didn't put it. And he's a professor, and I just figured out you must be an alpha also. Okay. And last but not least, of course, we have Amani Johnson. He is a Southfield School Board trustee, Southfield Public School Board trustee. And we've been working together inadvertently. We've had conversations. I've always been saying, we need to talk sometime soon. And he'll be like,
when? Call me.
and then I'm like, you know what? I need to talk to you. And then we made it happen. So I really appreciate you coming in and doing this. So about Amani. He is a political campaign strategist during the day. In the evening, he is the school board trustee. I really cannot see any of these words, so I'm like pulling out what I can. So he is a regional coordinator with the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and that's to protect Michigan's land, air, water, and democracy. He graduated from Central Michigan with a BS in Public and Nonprofit Administration. His intersectionality as a Black member of the LGBTQ plus community gives him a unique lens when it comes to issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that is one reason why I also wanted him to be here. So you can see why we have such an interesting group, because we have, I think, a very good perspective. And then my friend, Karen Dumas, who agreed to, I can't read. We'll be here for another. She, too, is a media contributor. Okay. Well, you've seen her on TV, in the paper. She will be the moderator tonight to make sure that we have some really good conversation and then also have some Q&As. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All right, let's give the mayor a round of applause, first of all, for her leadership and for taking the initiative to create this event tonight. And she was kind of concerned because there were so many people that signed up before, but we are about the quality of those who showed up as opposed to counting the heads and the quantity are here. So thank you all for being. You got your husband out. Hey, Cornell, I haven't seen you in a long time. It's nice to see you. All right, so welcome and thank everybody for joining us. Our distinguished panel, as you heard, brings a wealth of experience, knowledge, varied perspectives on the topic of professionalism and diversity. Their credentials are long and legitimate, so our introductions were brief. We want that time to be spent on substantive discussion. I want this to be informative, interactive. I want this to be conversational, so I'm not necessarily going to direct it to anybody in particular. And at the end, we do look forward to questions from the audience during the latter part of the program. So let's start this conversation. 1863, the emancipation of slavery. 1964 brought the Civil Rights Act. 2020, the murder of George Floyd brought commitment statements and DEI efforts. Every corporation, every company made a commitment statement and brought a diversity, equity, and inclusion representative. All of these were to represent turning points for Black people in America, and yet in 2023, here we are. Social, economic, political challenges remain. The disparities in education, healthcare, economic opportunities continue to make equality for us feel out of reach. Let me start asking the panel, whoever wants to go first, what gains have we really seen?
Oh, I'll start. Some of the gains that we have seen, I'm going to name those, and then I'm also going to give you my opinion on what has happened since then.
Right.
We've had gains in education. We've had gains in moving through various occupations and entrepreneurship. But as we gained over the years, there's also in the last several years has been a number of subtractions. And that should be more of a concern to us than anything else, especially when we're looking at diversity. Diversity is taken on many different shapes, and I'm sure everyone in here is well aware of that, from racial diversity, ethical, and I do mean ethical diversity, ethnicity, gender diversity. And then I'm sure some of you were reading, as I did today, that the Elliott Larson Act of Michigan has been expanded to be more inclusive. But my concern is, yes, we've gained. I'm probably one of the first people in my family to get a PhD. But yet, I look at the struggles that those that are coming behind me will have to be able to further their education. There are those who have been very successful as business people, corporation people. However, the corporate world and the business world is also shrinking in a number of African Americans in particular that are moving forth. So I'm going to let it move on, but my concern is gains, but the subtractions to me is what the issue is.
Go ahead, let's talk.
Go ahead.
I don't want to belabor the point, but she did make a great point. I think we have seen a great gain, but I feel like we can only get to a certain point. You'll see in a lot of org charts in different corporations, people of color only make it to a certain point in that org chart, and then and I think that's where she's kind of alluding to the subtractions for me personally. That's where I feel like we are subtracted. At my firm, I am one of 3 Black men, and there's only and a sea of white men and women, and there's only one Black man who is in leadership technically, but he's only gonna go so far, and I think that's where I see our challenges, and it concerns me honestly, actually.
Okay, and I want to come back to that a little bit in terms of what that makes you feel like being one of only 3. Do you feel the opportunity to talk? Is your voice heard? But I do want to get the other panelists' input in terms of, I mean, we have gains on paper, but have we really made any progress? I mean, I remember John S. Lewis was on he says, we've been coming here for 50 years, talking. I was like, okay, but what have we really accomplished? So from your perspective, what gains have we made?
Gains have been made. Let me just kind of give you a 30-second synopsis, excuse me. Gains have been made, but there have been significant losses.
Okay.
And I'll just cut to the chase. I've written about it in the free press. I've talked about it in media. So just very briefly, Karen's heard this story 1,000 times. My father was a legend in Detroit. He was a banking legend in the city of Detroit. And he had 2 degrees by the time he was 21 years old. And he went to 3 colleges by the time he was 21. He went to Morehouse College, got an undergrad, I think, from West Virginia State, and he got a master's from Marshall University. And so he moved to Detroit in 1957 with my mom to escape the segregated South. And on his way to Detroit, He was offered, his buddy said, let's stop at Indianapolis. He says, no, I want to go to Detroit because that's where everybody's going in 1957. Came up to Detroit and landed a job as a bank teller. Now remember, 21 years old, got 2 degrees, he lands up at a bank teller on the west side. The reason he got the job as a bank teller is because he was light-skinned. And therefore, they put him on the front lines because he would be non-threatening to white people. When non-threatening to white people, those people putting money in the bank and taking money out of the bank. And so white people will come and stare at my dad and say, is he black or is he white? He told me the story before he passed. But yet, my father he worked his way up for National Bank of Detroit, MBD, and became the highest ranking black in the city of Detroit, and became the highest ranking black banker in the entire country. And every step of the way, he reached back. He hired Dave Bing when Bing played for the Pistons. And Bing always tells the story that through that relationship, he was able to start Bing Steel. Eventually became mayor. Obviously, Karen knows that very well. He brought in many other legendary bankers to Detroit. So what's my point of my story? My point of my story is that he reached back because DEI, he was a forerunner in that space before it became this in vogue thing, right? And so he saw the value of reaching back to people and helping them in that space. So a lot of the legendary bankers in Detroit, in the metropolitan Detroit area, are here because of him. And so as I look on this issue and I think about where he came from and where we are today, yeah, we have made progress. But quite frankly, Karen, we have lost a lot of progress in the last 2 or 3 years. And then I always say, what is he thinking at this point? Because people say, Mark, we see you on TV, she and I, we've done Let It Rip together, and we do other things together, and they hear me on radio, whatever. But my point is, I am concerned. And I know we're going to delve into this. I'm concerned as to where we are. I worked in corporate America for 25 years. And just like my dad was the trailblazer and the highest ranking African American, I was a trailblazer in corporate. I was the first black to get to a certain level. I was the highest ranking black to become a senior vice president. I was the highest ranking black to do X, Y, and Z, right? But then I saw the progress that I was making. I would try to reach back to others. And my concern, quite frankly, is that while I may have broken glass ceilings in my corporate career, a lot of those glass ceilings still have not been broken, and they should be. So we'll come back and unpack them.
And we need to talk about how they are broken or if they are even breakable. Okay, Krista, Amani, you want
Sure, I will.
to? Okay.
I think that we have made progress, but I don't think that we have necessarily as a collective.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of systemic issues that aren't being addressed as to why, we're not seeing people of color in these CEO positions or breaking those glass ceilings. We have to talk about, inequities in education, and we have to talk about poverty and how we're addressing, the root causes of the issues versus, saying where are all of the black applicants for these positions.
Krista?
Yeah, thanks. So unlike some of the other panelists up here, I actually I call myself a statistic, and I hold that very proudly. So high school dropout by 9th grade, and I recognize that the glass ceilings that actually Mark is mentioning, I've been able to not only meet them, but also break through them. I've worked in education and policy in the city of Detroit. I also worked in economic development in the city of Detroit and had the privilege of also working in the village of Franklin in economic development, which is a predominantly affluent white community. And I think about my experiences in these spaces. I think about the opportunity at a national organization where I was serving as the fund development director, and now I actually work out of a national organization in New York. And again, all still with that 9th grade level education. And it is heartbreaking to me that while I am grateful for my successes and my strides, I recognize that a lot of my privilege lays in my appearance and how I can articulate. Oftentimes I'm very quickly asked, are you a graduate of U of M? And I'm very proud to be like, I dropped out of the Birmingham public schools at 9th grade with the intention to remove those divides that are intended to really identify and classify where someone belongs. And bring forth the narrative that despite policies, systemic barriers, I think there's a notion to continue to I don't know, I guess like challenge systems, which I would say like I'm definitely a challenger and I'm loud about it.
And that's the thing, is to challenge, because I feel like a lot of times when, and you talked about there being 3 people there, you talked about your dad and you being in those spaces, that in order to protect the position that you achieve, I don't want to say you assimilate, but you just don't challenge the system because you don't want to compromise that. So let me go back to you, and you said you're one of only 3 black men in your organization. Do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Or do you feel like a placeholder? This is just family here.
I know. I had to ponder for a second. I think at times I feel like all 3.
Okay.
So I think sometimes, of course, I feel seen, and sometimes actually it surprises me how sometimes I actually do feel seen by maybe this 60-year-old white man who's just like, Jalen, you're just doing an awesome job. Like, you're so talented. Thank you so much for all your help and all your assistance on this project. And then sometimes when we're all together, like recently we had a all office meeting. And so we bring all of our offices from Lansing and Sterling Heights and everywhere. And I'm like, still, it was only still 3 of us. And I think I met one other black man. He had a suit on, and I was surprised because I work in an engineering firm. So most of the African-American men that I see, they don't look like me all the time. So they're probably coming from the field, working in the field. And I don't like the way that sounds, but
We know what you mean.
but usually I'm like the only mid 20-year-old in a suit who has the capability to do what he wants technically when you're at work. And sometimes it can be uncomfortable and it can be weird. That meeting, I felt like a placeholder. It was weird because I felt disregarded at the table around my peers. I felt disregarded in our activities that we did to build each other up. And I'm over here like, I have all these critical thinking skills, but they all agree with each other. And so I'm over here on this island by myself, and I'm like, if you would have just listened to me, we could all had $100 gift card to wherever it was, but it was $100. And I'm thinking we could have all just worked together instead of you isolating me. And I think that's sometimes how I feel at work, just isolated or disregarded, almost as I'm invisible, like you didn't even see me when you brushed past me. And that, to me, is scary.
So does that make you, and when I say you, this is for everybody, if you have a similar experience, make you want to, let me see, how do I say this tactfully? Abandon those things that distinguish you for the purpose of trying to fit in? I know you don't. I can see that.
I was gonna say, I truly like live and breathe in the notion that I will not sell my soul for the dollar.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's at the bottom line. You can still maintain your individuality, right, inside the corporate space. I've done it. I know I've ruffled some feathers. If you know me, I'm a straight shooter. But you can maintain your individuality. You have to understand you're still within the corporate, from a business standpoint, by the way. You have to understand you're still within corporate guidelines and corporate policies. You just can't go off and say, hey, I'm from the east side, hey, what up, though? Right? I mean, you still have to, you can still maintain your individuality, but you got to do it within means. And one of the things I will say in my corporate life, in my business life, I've helped a lot of people get to the next level. Right? I'm a mentor to a lot of people. But I have scared a lot of people inside of corporate. And I have scared a lot of people because I've been called extremely smart. I worked for a CEO here in Detroit. He called me one of the best marketing minds. He's from Philadelphia. He says, you're one of the best marketing minds I've ever met. And clearly, you're the top marketing mind in the Midwest. And so when I heard that, I said, okay, in other words, I'm smart as anybody else. But then when I got to a certain level inside the organization, I became a threat. And then when I became a threat, someone tried to pull me back.
But don't you think that's the thing with black people in the first place, and that has been both our advantage and our disadvantage because we are a threat? Because given the opportunity that, we would not only meet, but exceed or excel beyond both expectation and desire for the general society?
And I would add to that we, African Americans in particular, we work harder. I think of my days when I was with IBM. Similar, and it's interesting listening to Jalen. Same experience that he's having now. I mean, I was having that when I came out of college in the 80s. You would think at some point in time that this would go away. I would be probably the only African American sitting in the room when certain decisions are made. And one of the things I learned going to what Mark said is my parents, in particular my mom, one of the things she always told me is never forget that you're black. And then secondly, she said that it's incumbent upon you to reach back and bring others along. But more importantly, since you're the only one sitting in that room, you need to be the one that get the information and share it with the others. And that's what I don't see being done anymore. It's almost, maybe it's a feeling of being
gatekeeping.
Yes. That you have the opportunity to be exposed to information. You have the opportunity to be exposed to resources that others don't have, and you do not come back and share them with the people in your community.
So let's talk about that. That's that internal, and I don't even want to say what we call that, but what is it about that makes us fearful, not realizing, Jalen, you said, when the guy tells you, oh, you're good, every time we do something, we represent everybody that looks like us. If you go out and rob somebody, every other black man is a thug, is a robber, is a whatever. But when you excel, you're different. So what is it that we do or don't do that is not bridging that connectivity so that people see that we see ourselves in each other enough to help, enough to celebrate the success of others and not be intimidated or threatened by it? Is it because not enough people get ahead and look back? And so we get afraid if I help you, you're going to forget about me? Is that what it is? Have we bought into this competitiveness so much that we fail to acknowledge the opportunity to help each other? Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right when you say we just have a competitive nature, and I don't have a good answer. Like, I'm not sure why that is, why we don't reach back and help those that are behind us. But I think that's ingrained in us, is being competitive.
But once upon a time, I remember stories my grandmother would say, that when black people were traveling from the South, all they had to do was find another black family and they were okay. Like, we weren't afraid of each other. We come from a legacy of excellence. We come from a legacy of peace. We come from a whole different legacy than what we've been told we are today. Where did that change? Where's that disconnect?
So I would just like to ask a clarity question in the context of other states and other regions, or specific to Michigan? Because I'm a native Californian, and in the LA region, within my familia, there is cohesion of the Puerto Rican, Black, Hispanic community. I had an opportunity to be in upstate New York at the end of February for a legislative policy of all movers and shakers across New York and the city. There is cohesion and love in that space, and if there's one thing that I share with one of my mentors who actually is with the City of Detroit's development department, I'm like, we get in our own way in the City of Detroit because we do have that fear factor of wanting to be a gatekeeper.
I can agree with that. Mark,
Well,
I see you thinking.
It's not just Detroit. I've lived in 8 different cities across the country. And every city I've lived in, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Jacksonville, Florida, Wichita, Kansas, always missed someplace. We are our own worst enemy. Let me just cut to the chase. We all heard of the crab in the barrel syndrome, right? Right. If one crab rises up, what does the craft at the bottom of the barrel do? They try to pull it back down. Right? And I think in a lot of ways, we are our own worst enemy. And so I've heard people say, I've made it. But yet, why don't you reach back and help other people who are still trying to make it? And so we have not had that same level of exposure over the years, right? And because I've heard the same conversation in my generation. My great grandmother had a 4th grade education, right? She was a maid, a live-in maid for Art Carney, who was on a TV show, The Honeymooners. She would go from the South to the North, earn her money, send the money back to the South to educate my parents, and my grandparents. So there was that true value of the family. There's no question. But I think what's happened is something has broken down over the last several years, the last several decades, where we say we support each other, but I really wonder if we really support each other.
So I'm going to ask this question because I have a very unusual approach or opinion on it. What is yours on desegregation? I mean, prior to desegregation, black people supported each other. They had their own, communities. They had their own. But the minute that black people had the opportunity to go out and be a part of mainstream society, it was like all hell broke loose. So was desegregation a good thing, or was desegregation a setback for black unity?
It was a good thing for us to have the opportunity to get educated like everybody else. Let's go back to you. Let's go back to me. I'll use myself as an example. All right, I was born and raised in Detroit, born and raised on the West Side. And when my parents moved from near Central High School to Northwest Detroit, we truly had a community. It was a community that bonded together. And desegregation was there, no question, but it was predominantly, it went from a Jewish area to a black area. But everybody in that neighborhood, it was truly a village, right? So I think desegregation was not a bad thing, not at all. But I think what's happened is a lot of us have started to experience success. And a lot of us started to move to
Our
different...
perception of success,
Our
because it's
perception of
relative.
success. And some of us started moving in different areas, right? And we think we've made it. And then we still have a lot of people who have not made it. They're still back in the hood, so to speak. So what I'm giving my comment is when I grew up in Northwest Detroit, we are all from the same ilk. That neighborhood was, I grew up, my next door neighbor, I was Aretha Franklin's paper boy. Lawrence Payton of the Ford Tops was my next door neighbor. Marvin Gaye lived around the corner from me. We had school teachers, we had professionals. But they were all within the community. And they reached back and they helped each other. So that's the long and short of saying, see, desegregation is good, no question about it. But I think the more success that some people have had, some of us have forgotten where we've come from.
Anybody else?
Well, a piece of that too is I think we forget about community. The community was very strong, especially as African Americans were moving from south to north. Even the ones that was in the north, they built themselves into a community. One of the things that opportunity can lead to is that's not always positive. As you begin to move away from the community, sometimes people get too caught up in trying to assimilate into the other communities and forget about that. I was once told when I was more involved with the NAACP by one of the national presidents, it doesn't mean anything if you're number one, you're the first person to do this, or you're the first person to do that, if there's not a number two.
Right.
And a number two comes from the sense of your responsibility to understand the importance of community, because you're helping, you're keeping the community strong.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? No? Go ahead and say it, Jalen.
I don't think so. No, I don't know. Let me see. Catch my bearings here. Okay, so I think I have no real ties to, I have ties to it, but I wasn't brought up in that time, so I don't really.
We weren't either. We're not that old. This is just a generic question.
But I'm just saying.
It's what we read.
I know, yeah, what we read. But I think we have an issue of just, I think the issue is, so once you assimilate, you're trying to assimilate, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily think it's assimilating. I think it's more so, why is this person being treated, why do they have all these opportunities? And I think I think that's what people who move out of the city are trying to accomplish. They just want to
Or
feel
is that
like
a way
that.
of seeking validation? Do we see that as validation? Do we see moving out of the hood, if you will, or being someplace that we were once either denied or we think we're not supposed to be? Does that somehow represent some form of validation?
I think it represents almost like maybe like a slap in the face to people who didn't allow us to live there. And I think that's what people consider that as, like, hi, my family couldn't live here such and such time ago, and now we're here and we have all this property, all this land. And I think that is more so the case. But I know there's a lot that goes with that, right? So there's also people who will feel cocky and entitled, like, yeah, I'm better than you because I live in this city. But I think also people are just, I don't know, trying to make sure they have a better life, trying to get over
But
the
why do
hump.
we see doing something that other people are doing as better?
Because for so long, whiteness has been seen as better. So like, and like what Jalen's saying, people feel superior living in different communities. So like growing up, Southfield, was a more affluent black community than Detroit. West Bloomfield and Farmington Hills are more affluent than Southfield. So you see people, and I see these narratives and people moving and assimilating to what their neighbors are doing.
Go ahead, Krista.
I'll just add like a few things, right? So we do live in a society that embodies capitalism, and by capitalism, it's white supremacy. And so, like, contrary to, right, like what is deemed appropriate for blackness, when we endorse it, it is not endorsed until Kim K comes and endorses it. Then it is appropriated. So, right, like, there's a piece of that is a challenge that I suspect maybe why we move in places and feel as though that we need to assimilate. I'm proud to say that actually, when I first bought my house in Lathrop Village, since we were talking about my house, I remember inviting my previous boss over, and as soon as they pulled up, they were like, you're in a sundown town. Like, you're bougie. And I was like, call it what it is. Like, this is my home, and like, I'm happy to be here. And I know that beyond just like what I'm creating for myself, like the notion that we have to work to develop and build generational wealth for our families and our children. So I might have broken through the glass ceiling for myself, understanding like the barriers that I had to overcome. But I wouldn't be able to set up a fruitful future for my children. I will also add that as a small business owner in the city of Detroit, right, and having that lens, having worked in education and policy for about 5 years, and then economic development in the city of Detroit for about 2 or 3, I continue to hear two things. The lack of quality of education, as you mentioned in Southfield, but in the city of Detroit for black and brown children.
Right.
And the need and the drive for quality education. And I started to like reflect on, I know I look young, but I also have an almost 16-year-old, almost 10-year-old, right? And so in looking at how my children, I'm pushing them into the private sector of education, seeing opportunity for the ability to think more boldly and broadly and not in a level of conformity that we see in our traditional education sector, which conformity is designed, when we look at the curriculum and how it's developed, is designed by white publishers, right? In a form of, again, capitalism, white supremacy. So in my mind, I was thinking, like, if I'm awarding this opportunity to my children, great, but what does it look like for my community? And in that sense, launch this social impact small business with the notion to be able to like really bring opportunity to black and brown children that families might not otherwise be able to have access to. And in that, hearing again from the economic development lens, this new and old Detroit, right? This was right before COVID. And so what was it? The displacement, like this language around like what development looks like in the city of Detroit. And I'm on 6 Mile, Livernois. So like right in the heart of it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm hearing this concern of like what's gonna happen of displacement. So how do we in my opinion, just blend, make it a very intentional space where, like, when you're physically in this space, right, you're going to have families from all walks of life, social, economically, racially, and so forth. But while you're in this space, we are going to honor and learn from each other. And in that, shared resources.
But, can I piggyback on one thing?
Sure.
So we're having a conversation. When you assimilate and you get more money, let me just say one thing again. I'm going to cut to the chase. Don't get too comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think and it's bringing it back in the spirit of conversation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? I've had a lot of my friends who made it. I have a lot of my friends who they live in these beautiful homes. I'm a little bit more mature than both of you. They're living in beautiful homes and they've made it, right? People can say, I made it. I lived at one time in my life. I had a showcase home. I made it, whatever the hell that means, okay? But in the next breath, what I mean by that is just because you make it doesn't mean you get comfortable. So when I made it, then all of a sudden I broke through the glass ceiling. So Kelly knows I get emotional when I speak sometimes. I'm a straight shooter. I broke through the glass ceilings and I had that ceiling shut right back on top of me. Why? All of a sudden, this brother here from the west side of Detroit, who broke the glass ceilings like his father did, became a threat to other members of the leadership team. I sat on the leadership team where I made policy for corporations. I had a $200 million budget. I have a championship ring for the Miami Heat because I negotiated 5-year contracts when I lived in Florida with the sports franchises. So I became this, I was traveling all over the state, I was doing all the TV interviews, you name it, I did it. Till one day, my face was shown up in front of 60,000 people where the Jacksonville Jaguars played. And I was on the screen where the Miami Heat played. And my boss, who was the president of the company at the time, is on the field with me. They said, Mark, we want you to flip the coin, right? I said, no, I'm gonna defer to my boss. I leave, I go back and I'm entertaining clients. He leaves, he's a white guy, same age. He's entertaining clients until they said this. We saw your CEO on the big screen. They thought I was the CEO. Next thing I know, I get a phone call. So at the end of the story is I made all this level of success, I broke through the ceiling, and I was asked to leave the organization. And after, in retrospect, the reason I was asked to leave, and the black folks inside the company didn't want me to leave. They were threatening a boycott, that this man should not be leaving the company, because I took the organization to the next level. And I told those brothers and sisters, I said, don't do that for me. I said, if you want to follow my legacy when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is you take my story, don't get comfortable, stay hungry, and turn around and help other people. And that's the point of my story. So I made it, right? I assimilated. But then I had the door slapped right back in my face. And to a brother from Detroit and from Metro Detroit, I went to Southville High School, I graduated from Southville High School. I'm not gonna curse. That hurt. That actually hurt. But the biggest success is as I've gone through that, I rebounded from that. I continue to grow. I'm still breaking ceilings and breaking glass to this day. All right? So my point is, if you make it, if you assimilate, it's important that you don't forget where you came from, that you always reach back and help other people. And I'm telling you people, diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack right now. I hope we get to that. And I'll give you some statistics. It's under attack. So we gotta stay vigilant and we gotta stay strong, but we gotta continue to help others.
But what does that mean? Because are we fighting policy or are we fighting practice? Because we have all these laws on the book. We say, hey, you know, it's illegal to discriminate based on race, gender, sexual preference, you know, color of your hair, whatever. But there are opportunities and loopholes for people to get around that. So we can have the stuff on the books. You know, we talked about education, but yet and still the education that is made available in urban areas is still substandard. I mean, both of my kids went to private school. I was working for the city at the time, but I was not going to politicize their education. So my son went to UAD Jesuit, my daughter went to Liggett in Grosse Pointe. The college recruiters, when they come to the high school, they would tell them, a 2-point from here beats a 4-point from DPS. That's what we're working. So are we fighting policy or are we fighting practice? And when you're talking about fighting practice, a person's application of their prejudice or their preference is almost hard to regulate.
So,
Well,
you can go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, thank you. I don't think you can fight practice to a strong degree, because one of the things, everyone is embedded with their own beliefs, and their beliefs comes from their background and their own experiences. Now, the key thing is getting to the diversity part. Can you blend those? Can you blend those in the workplace? Can you blend those in our society? Can you blend those and move forward? The bigger thinkers can. Those who are not as open-minded, you want. I do have to leave, but this is one of the last things I want to end with is people don't relinquish power. And that is one of the biggest things we're facing now. Our world is getting more color in it. And those who have had power over the years are not understanding that they won't be able to have the power and the positions that they had before. And instead of looking for a way to blend that, become more diverse, more open in the conversation, they're fighting it. But that's human nature. People do not give up power.
Right.
And I was once told that if you want power, you almost have to take it.
You know, you make a good point. We have to leave. Here's a phenomenal map. If you look at the U.S. Census data dating back to 1950, it's called the Diversification of America.
Thank you, Nancy, for being here. We know you have to leave. Thank you.
If you look at, so just imagine a visual of the United States from 1950, and they use colors. And the map in 1950 is all white. So from the West Coast to the East Coast is all homogeneous. By decade, guess what? It becomes less white. It becomes more different colors, different shades. By 1970, 1980, now look at 2020. If you look at this map, it's half of it's shaded with different hues of people. In the projections by 2040, 2015, this country will be, the minority will be the majority. And if you want to look at the future of the U.S. 10, 15, 20 years ago, look at the state of California. The state of California is what people are projecting this country to look like in 2050. So what Nancy is saying, this is what she said. For those who have been in power for so long, this is what we're beginning to see. For those who have been in power for so long, they don't want to give up that power. And so therefore, those who are becoming more powerful because of sheer numbers, right, through diversity, that's where you're seeing this conflict that's going to begin taking place. Because you have people who've been in power versus those who are trying to.
But are we, or how do we collectively prepare to accept, acknowledge, and execute that power in a way that's beneficial for us collectively? I want you all to solve all the world's problems with this discussion.
So I have a comment on the policy question.
Okay, please.
I think we still have a long way to go policy-wise. I think it might be a combination of policy and practice.
Okay.
But if you look at the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, it doesn't include sexual orientation. So I can be fired for the gay part of me, but not the black part.
Okay.
And then when we talk about education, that's very policy-oriented too. The way that school districts are funded. We recently passed a capital bond here in Southwood Public Schools. Thank you to Lathrop Village voters. But like the way that school districts are funded, they're funded locally. So like we have to raise all of our own funds to fix our schools, to build new buildings, to do all of these things. And in lower income communities that tend to be, communities of color, the tax burden is much higher on those residents because they make less money. They have lower property values. Whereas in a West Bloomfield or a Bloomfield Hills, their residents are not feeling, their taxes are not impacting them as much as ours are.
But let's talk about acceptance. I mean, I remember when, and I think Jennifer Granholm was governor at the time, and state test scores, and we can apply this recently. And I remember she publicly said, and they were abysmal, and she publicly said if this were to happen anyplace else, they would storm the Bastille. We talk about what happens in Flint, and that if that were to even remotely start to take place in Grosse Pointe or West, it wouldn't happen. So, let's talk about those in terms of, have we failed to recognize our social, political, and even economic? Our disposable income is off the charts, but have we somehow failed to collectively recognize and leverage those things for collective benefit?
Go ahead.
So I will say, from the education lens, to my advantage, I was done by 9th grade, so I don't have a sense of conformity. Therefore, I don't follow rules.
Right.
Therefore, in working in excellent schools, Detroit, for example, or even my most recent employer, in that sense, it was discussing like K-12 and the need for children to show up on count day, right? And in my mind, I'm like, but if we're not getting the resources we need, like, why aren't we reversing the language and being like, families, sit your ass out with your kids, right? Because there's not the resources that we know that we need that should be available to these children to make an equitable lens and opportunity. Also understanding how economic development, especially in the last 10 years in the city of Detroit, has continued to rise. And when we talk about community benefits, we are somehow neglecting to address and ignore how those funds push into the district. That's number one. Number two, as far as like early childhood, because that is something that, of course, the state, people are really excited about. Like, there's more seats, there's more funding, but there's still a challenge of the need for educators, whether it's early childhood or K-12, and then the actual investment that goes to these educators to further educate our children. So there's a challenge for the infrastructure of a brick and mortar facility, and then there's also a challenge and a gap of like how dollars are moving to the educators. And in that sense, I'm like, can you imagine truly, it's the same notion, that narrative that we share, if we stop spending in one day, if we just chose to sit our children out for one day, we will start to see some systems change in policy. We will see a desire for folks to be like, we need to address this. Because also the people who, when we talk about all these policies, when they're not talking about our wonderful peers, they're talking about the backs of Black and brown people who hold this economy.
Exactly. And I also think that some of that is on people in our communities. People make money off of people who don't have money. And some of those people that make money off of people that don't have money look like us. And so the conversation, especially as it centers around education, nobody ever talks about how to teach people to navigate the challenges they may have if they're working every day or whatever. It doesn't have to be the reason why they're not able to spend time with their kids, the value of coming. Because I hate when they do count day. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, because you don't have the conversation about showing up to school every day. But you've got pastors, you've got all these people that are making money in charter schools, the management companies. It is crazy. But none of it, and I don't mean financially, but just the impact, doesn't trickle down to the kids. And so do we even want to collectively change that conversation so that what we do have begins to work for the people it's supposed to impact?
Well, I think I'm an educator, by the way. I teach at 3 different universities. So I deal with students from Eastern Michigan University, Medina University, and Northwood. And we got to figure out how to change the conversation, right? And I think in my classrooms, what I tell my students, when you walk in that door, because I'm going to keep trying to tie it back to the diversity component as well. I know
Well, all of this is about diversity.
Yeah.
I know you're probably talking about in the sense of
Right.
checking a box.
No, not necessarily. What I'm
Okay.
saying is, so I tell students when they come into the classroom, is I do challenge them to change their thought process.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, I'm not your traditional professor, where I just come in and I lecture from the book. I don't do that. I lecture based on real life experiences. And so, and in my classes, I'm obviously Eastern's a PWI, right? And so I brought in a speaker recently who's a senior exec at one of the plants in the city. And he texted me, we're classmates at Eastern Michigan. He's also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. But he sends me a text and he says, we're all the brothers and sisters. And I replied and I said, what do you mean? He says, when we were in school here back in the 80s, there were more black students up here in Eastern Michigan than there are today. And I looked around the room, I said, he's right. So I think even when we think about the educational level, are we still providing educational opportunities for all individuals to come into a major institution, whether it's Eastern, U of M, Michigan State, whatever it might be? But when they get into the classroom, Karen, I do try to change the conversation with them. And I do have very open and frank conversations about real life, how it pertains to business, because I teach business classes. So that's a tough question to answer. Is it the policy? How do we continue to affect change? But I really think at the educational level, people have to become more involved. We have to figure out how to get involved in the educational system, how to push back, and don't just accept things for what they are.
But do people even know what to ask for anymore? I spoke to a lady today. I was asking people about their opinion on yesterday's or last night's State of the City. And people are just exhausted. And I can only assume that they feel that way across the board and in other areas. There's so much going on. There's so much happening, but yet so little is actually changing. I mean, we're still having, you can call it what you want, but we're still having the same conversations that we've been having for decades. Crime, education, economic opportunities. Healthcare disparities. I mean, when COVID first hit, everybody, even in the medical industry, acted as though they just realized that there were disparities in the medical industry for black people. It's like, this isn't new. The president of the American Medical Association is a black woman. Okay, what are we not doing when we get to those positions to help change the reality and the narrative of the area that you're representing? Stop thinking so much, Jalen. Just talk. I want to hear like you just at a restaurant. Tell us that thought process.
So I'm thinking when you talk about, black CEOs and people who are in leadership, I think one of the issues is that they're trying to do their best, but across the board, right? So they're trying to make everybody happy. And I think...
Are they, or are they just, again, as we talked about earlier?
Or maybe a placeholder. Who knows?
Or protecting their position by not challenging anything. That's
Possibly.
a reality. We don't want to say it, but that's a reality.
That's true.
Politically, at a corporate level.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can be scared to break the barrier, but you weren't scared to get there. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes or maybe you were placed in that position, but I think sometimes we're just scared to break that barrier or anything.
Or to speak out for risk
Right.
of losing what they've accomplished. I mean, I knew a lady who was the DEI director of a very large, very prominent organization in the city of Detroit. And she said, I'm just there. I am literally just there. They don't listen to me, but I'm the person that they cart out when it's time to say, hey, look, we got a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. And this is, talk about how many black people we have here. Talk about how nice we are, how good we are to the coloreds. Come and tell them. But when she made recommendations about how to change the organization so that people there not only had a place, but had a voice and some degree of input for change, fell on deaf ear.
I think I had the opportunity of speaking to another major, I know you're referencing, I had the opportunity of speaking to another major organization downtown. Over 500-600 people in attendance. And it was on DEI. Now, let me just, again, I'm going to cut to the chase here. So before I made my comments, the senior management team says, Mark, can you tone it down? We don't want you to upset the apple cart. Come up when it comes to DEI. You hear some cold words in there? You hear some cold words in there? I said, sure, I'll be happy to tone it down. I got in front of the stage. Did I tone it down? No. I said exactly what was on my mind, and I told them exactly what the challenges were within this organization. Obviously, I can't say what it is, very well known. And I just told it like it was. Now, here's the point of the story. So when I get back to my office, I get an email from the leadership team, all white folks, that said, thank you. We needed to hear that, number one. Then I got emails from black folks and other people of color who said, thank you. But they thanked me for a different reason. They said, because you said exactly what we've been thinking, but we can't say that internally.
And that's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate because they felt like there will be retribution and their jobs will be lost.
And that's part of it. You know, it's the fear. I mean, I was on the board of a gold standard organization, a gold standard board, and the same thing. There weren't a lot of blacks on the board, but they come up to me and say, "Karen, we need to say this. We need to." I'm like, "Oh, why can't?
Right.
Why can't you say it? Why are we so afraid to be who we are, especially at a time when you talked about cultural appropriation? Everybody wants to be black until they're in front of a police car. We see everybody emulating the things that our young black men and women are doing, what they're wearing, what they're saying. If I see something on TikTok one more time, I mean, and even here at the state level in the government, you all are raising money to buy the governor a pair of buffs. Like, what kind of message are we sending? We're trivializing who we are. We don't have to invite everybody to the picnic. There are other groups, if you say something about them, they stick together and they will run you a new one.
Right.
But for us, we're always the first to try to extend and we understand what discrimination is like. We understand what being ostracized is like. So we tend to be more sensitive. I get that. But we're always trying to be the first one to extend an olive branch from a tree that we don't own. Or that our ancestors were lynched from. Like, where does that come from? Is that the Stockholm Syndrome? What?
So I was, I want to circle back because I've been holding this out in my head. I'm like, don't lose it, don't lose it. But I'm thinking about, you had asked pretty much when will we see some sort of change?
Mm-hmm.
And Mark and I very briefly were actually talking about the State of the City address, which I did not watch. But the unemployment rate in the state of Michigan, I would like to go there, right? The workforce narrative, which again, we can imagine who's already sharing and designing that language, is stating that we're at our lowest rate of unemployment. However, we all know that there are a plethora of positions that have openings, and there's a huge demand of need for workers. So I lovingly have been state of Michigan officials and national officials out of DC. Please, pull the numbers within the data that we can see in the state of Michigan around unemployment and how when there was PPU, unemployment was floating in the city or in the state. In that time, who invested that money into thyself? Because in my mind, two things are happening. If I was receiving unemployment because of the need to stay at home and care for my children and feeling as though that this is actually compensating me something more than what I'm accustomed to making at a local grocer, for example, I'm likely going to take the opportunity to invest in something I love, a business. I'm going to launch that LLC if I am aware of these tools and resources. There's also the governor who had announced, not by bonuses, not a bonus in pay, but we're going to offer you an opportunity to go and get your associates, which, again, if you're from the city of Detroit and you work in urban schools, you're that's just a tip, right? That's already been there.
Right.
But nonetheless, now you have folks who are wanting to go after and get their associates, which in my mind, if I'm in school full-time now, trying to go after my bachelor's, because again, I dropped out, but I would be willing to take out a Pell Grant because I'm low income. And I'd be willing to take out some sort of Stafford or unstafford loan, and I guarantee you that's going to make me equivalent to what I'd be making if I was working in your local grocer. So where's the data that you're not actually telling us? Because I believe that there's a fear, there's a threat of knowing that folks who utilize those benefits and services, again, are people of color, for sure, and or coming from underprivileged, under-resourced, rural communities. And therefore, they are investing into their future, and or they're looking to actually change and create a new norm or change the system. I will also say that I think our youth, because there's so much that is being bogged down, whether it's identifying with LGBTQ+, the mental health toll that is taking its burden on children, whether it's in the K-12 sector and or those who've entered the college sector, I think those are going to be the ones that are going to finally make the change in our system that we have long been waiting for to see, because they're not having it.
Right.
They're none of this is making sense.
Kelly, you ran up there. What do you have? I know you have something to say.
I know, and I apologize. I wasn't going to do this, but it was something you said, especially was when you were talking to Jalen and Mark, and it was about being afraid and why other people don't help. Why Black people don't help other Black people once they get into a particular role. And so for me to be in this role for, I think it's 6 years now, when I started, it was very difficult for me to, and I'm saying this and I'm being very transparent, it was very difficult for me to do things like more for Black people because I didn't want the backlash of me not being voted in again or me failing of me because I'm the first Black mayor.
Okay.
So it was very like, okay, how do you do this?
I appreciate you saying that, though. I
was-
really
mean,
do.
But it's fact. But something happened inside of me where now it's just, I can't say it the way I want to say it, but it's just,
Yes, you can.
now it's being filmed. It's where I say and do what I need to do.
Right.
You know, it was because I can now say it, and I know that some of the staff is going to be upset, but this is my last year as mayor. I no. So I am acting different because I know that this is my last year, where it's kind of like, I need to tell you everything that I need to tell you now. Someone did come to me and say, before we go into council and say, can you dial back the racism stuff that's been, the back in the past about Lathrop, can you dial it back? Then I did dial it back. I'm like, okay, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. But then I'm like, no, that's your history.
Yep.
That's our reality. And so when I became the first Black mayor here, as most of you already know, house was egged, house spray painted, totally disrespected on a regular basis. So now I'm out here. This is the product of what you did. So this is
Right.
why I am who I am now. But I do encourage people to not be afraid, because when you don't have that fear of doing certain things, you can change the absolute world. I'm not afraid of being broke. Been there, done that. I'm not afraid of losing my job. Been there, done that. I'm not afraid of losing. Like many people say, I can't believe you ran for Congress, and how do you feel? I feel really good because I know what losing feels like. So I'm not afraid of losing anymore. So I did that. But so now when I'm out, it's like, well, what can you possibly do? Take my life? That's probably just it.
But some of that fear can be dissipated if we knew we had each other's back.
True.
I remember somebody brought together some leaders in the city and said, hey, we're still a predominantly African-American city. How do we start? No, not that one. There's another one.
How many of them have we done?
In terms of too many to not be farther along. But we're still a predominantly African-American. What do we need to do as leaders and how to? And so they're having all this conversation. They got PowerPoints and all that. I said, I understand that. But if we don't have baseline respect for each other, none of this makes any difference. I mean, basic respect to look each other in the eye, hold the door, say thank you. If you don't do something to help, don't do anything to hurt. And I think people would feel more comfortable in an organization, individually, collectively, standing up and speaking up if they knew they had their tribe or the tribe behind them. Don't need to agree with you, don't need to like you, don't even need to know you. But standing up for something that has a benefit outside of our immediate benefit. Somebody came to me and said, hey, this proposal we need to have a Black person on it, and blah, 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 this would be a quick 25. And I said, no, because I don't agree with it. And they said, well, this would be an easy 25. I said, then you won't have a problem finding somebody else to do it. I'm not doing that because I don't believe in it.
Not all money is good money.
Not all money is good money, but the point is that what impact is that going to have on something? Maybe it doesn't affect me. But that's how we have to think, and we don't. It's too much me and not enough we. And that's why we are where we are. I mean, they're on a board, and they were talking about, I said, I don't like the thought of us constantly promoting suburbanites to come in and help the poor Black kids in Detroit. I said, we need to have something so people in the city of Detroit have a sense of ownership. Maybe it's not all about money and contribution. Maybe it's help. Maybe it's whatever, but a sense of ownership. One of the other black members of the board, this is a different board, but he came to me, he said, we're going to take that out of the minutes. I said, excuse me? He said, yeah, we're going to take that out of the minutes. I said, all right, suit yourself. But that's the kind of stuff that continues to undermine anything that we do. And it's just an example. I'm sure it happens in all of your lives and in your existence and your daily engagements. But let me take this to the DEI before Mark. I don't want him to say I'm not talking about it, he and Kelly. What does that look like? Like when we say we want diversity, equity, and inclusion, what does that look like? And then we're going to take some questions from the audience. What does it look like?
I'm still asking that. That's
Okay,
why I
fair
want.
enough.
That's why I wanted to have the panel, because right now the way it feels to me, it's a checkbox.
Yep.
And I'm trying so hard not to go down the slippery slope. When we accepted the whole people of color, that checkbox started eliminating us. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's someone of color that you need there. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need a black person. Inclusion, I think that the younger generation is doing a great job of inclusion. And we had this discussion Monday. We're just trying to understand younger people's thought process, and like what you said, because they're not having it. It can't be the same way. But you also have to have organizations and people ready to be open to that inclusion. You know, and also, just like what we want people to understand us, we also have to be willing to teach other people. And that's something that I don't really see. Like, if I want you to know about my background, I want you to know about my people. I would like to see other people from, you know, if it's the LGBTQ plus community, you know, explain to me, what does this mean? Like, honestly, I woke up one day and they said, you got to say your pronouns. And I'm like, what? You know, I don't understand. But then explain to me where it was one person finally explained the whole thing to me, because it was like I felt like I was in the dark. So I think we still have a long way to go for it, but right now it just feels like it is a checkbox. And like the one thing that cracks me up, and maybe this is wrong, maybe it's right, when I see that they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion person, and it's a white person, it just makes me kind of go, okay, that's different. That's why I'm just thinking that it's a checkbox.
But
what is
diversity is white
diversity,
women.
equity, and inclusion. What we've done is, I was trying to get the other panelists in input, but what we've done, we dumbed it down to black and white. That's not what DEI is. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a collection of people, thoughts, ideas, backgrounds, behaviors, the representation of the community at large, in a nutshell. But what we've done is we've let people categorize it as, you're right, it's a checkbox. I'm going to check the box. I'm going to send everybody to a training class. We're all going to sing Kumbaya. All right, check the box, and life goes back as normal. That's not DEI. See, so DEI is if you think about how I described it to you, it's also understanding other people's backgrounds. It's understanding where they come from. We can leverage and learn from each other. From a business standpoint, if you have a diverse leadership team, you can increase your business revenue by 19% versus if you have a homogeneous leadership team. Why? Because people want to do business with people that look like them, and people want to do business in communities with people that represent them. It's not rocket science. I'm gonna get to your question about white folks taking over diversity spots. After George Floyd, diversity positions in corporate America more than doubled. It virtually tripled. Since that time, in the last 2 years, 50% of the people who went into DEI jobs have left. Why did they leave? And the majority of those who left were black folks, being replaced by white folks. Why did they leave? Because they didn't have the resources. It's what Karen said earlier. What was that quote you said that person said? You gave the example, and the person said, she can't affect change.
Oh, well, you were talking, okay, yeah, you're just saying she's like a seat filler, like nothing that she said or did, it was just, come out and, hey, look, we've got a black woman that's our DEI director.
Bingo.
But that was it. When she tried to make recommendations for change that would reflect or create the opportunity for true diversity, equity, and inclusion. it fell on deaf
So
ears.
therefore, it's basically you're putting wallpaper on the wall. You're putting lipstick on the pig, so to speak. And I think that's a great example. So people are leaving. People are actually leaving the space. The people who had those DI positions 2 years ago, now they're leaving because they're burnt out. They're frustrated. They can't affect change. So guess who's getting those positions now? Right. And that's why you're finding an influx of our Caucasian brothers and sisters in those positions. This is not a knock on them. It's not a knock on anybody. But I just want to give you the understanding of what we're seeing in this dynamic that's impacting all of us. So therefore, what does it look like? It has to be a reflection of all of us, DEI. The problem is it's not going to happen until we communicate with each other, until we learn from each other. And if we can't stop the basic levels of communication and understanding, I don't want to take another exam. I'm not going through another webcast. Every time somebody asks me to take a DEI, I don't take a class. I'm not going to do it. Put yourself in my shoes and see how I live. That's why I started this evening out by talking about my dad. There was a purpose why I told you the story, because it puts me in a different light, in a better understanding of who I am sitting here in front of you. And we spent more time doing that, understanding each other, we will truly learn from each other. But right now, the last thing I will say, those commitment statements are a piece of crap.
Yeah, they are.
They're a piece of crap. And what prompted, and I reached out to Karen, and Karen and I did a couple of things on TV together on this topic. But I wrote an article about 6 months ago in the Free Press about that. And what I said was, and here's what drove me nuts. Right after George Floyd, everybody's putting out commitments. We're committed to the community. We're committed to hiring diverse people, blah, blah, blah. So the people who wrote it, I actually went to their website, and I wrote it in the Free Press. It's right there. I said, I went to their website, and every single person on that executive management team was what?
Not
Yeah.
black.
Non-black. But yet they're talking about a commitment to the community. So the only way we're going to affect change is that if you're going to write a commitment statement, you better live up to it, adhere to it. But what's happening, there's a gap right now. People are writing it, but they're not adhering to it.
But that's a lack of accountability,
Yes,
and
it is.
we aren't holding, people get upset. They're like, oh, well, this person represents this, we're going to boycott. Okay, but then look at the conglomerate of the ownership of that company. If you're going to boycott Doritos or, you know what I'm saying? It's a huge thing. If we're going to hold people accountable based on who they are or what they represent, then we have to be comprehensive about it. It can't just be selective. I'd like to, if there are any questions from the audience, input, criticisms, compliments, we aren't taking up a collection, so we're just going to talk. Yes, sir.
I think about the fact that we black community. And part of it is outside of one time, and it may be before my time, but my understanding is, when our community, the doctors, we were in the community, which is why we came together, kind of what you talked about, Mark. Kind of what you talked about, Mark, about all the people who were famous and went on to do stuff, but you were all in the trying with one another. And then we had the riots that happened, and unfortunately, when the riots happened, they happened in the neighborhoods that we lived in, and a lot of us who were affluent eventually moved out because the stuff got messed up. It's not safe. Looting's happening here. And so again, you have the people who can afford to get out of the mess, And so now those who are doing okay away from those who aren't doing okay.
But isn't that like internal discrimination? You talked about the light skin, the dark skin, we don't want to, we talk about people that exhibit a behavior that the mainstream society tries to emulate, but we find some comfort in putting them down for being who they are. When you've got folks paying to be like, I'm trying to say that nicely. But those are the people in the hood. They're ghetto. They're this. They're that. So isn't that part?
Well, it is a problem.
that?
It is a
Yeah.
problem because the thing is we can't have a community if we are separate from one another.
Right.
The only way we're going to have a community is we have to be together, and part of that being together has to be physically. If we are not physically in the same space, occupying the same space, growing up together, intertwining one another, we're never going to be a community. which means we're always going to have at least two objectives. There's going to be the objective for those of us who have, and there's less of us than those of who don't have, fighting for breaking the glass ceiling, fighting for getting some opportunity, fighting for getting nicer cars and a nice neighborhood. And those are just trying to figure out, how do we do okay in life? And unfortunately, they don't have those of us who are probably more capable to help involved in their life.
But if I hear you, correct, and I
Thank
agree.
you.
And I agree. I hear you coming from. But let's go to 2023 where we are today. So yes, back in the 60s and 70s, pre-riot, post-riot, whatever, there was a very strong community bond, no question. But we know that our young people are, my kids my son lives in suburban Chicago. My daughter lives in suburban Detroit, right? So they're one generation removed from me. But my point is while our kids continue to spread out, if I can just communicate one, and I tell this to my kids all the time, I always say, please don't forget where you came from, right? And what I mean by saying that is even as we spread out as a people, we live in these metropolitan areas, these beautiful homes, and we're up 96, we're in the Lakeville Village and Southfield, whatever these cases might be, it's still okay to go back and support.
Or how about just not look down on folks that are different than you? I
Absolutely.
mean, that's a huge thing because, again, we find comfort in saying, oh, look at them, when they are looking at us saying the same thing regardless of where we live or what we drive.
Can we also talk about, I've always had an issue with this, but it's the same way if you talk about people who live in Detroit. There's always this initial, if I was to ever say I live in Lakeville Village to maybe a Detroiter, there's always this initial, you're not better than me. And I'm like, where did that come from?
Right.
And I think that's also an issue that I have personally with, it seems like there's some kind of competition. I feel like Black people always are in competition with each other, and that just can grind my gears because I'm not coming to you in that way. I'm coming to you like just natural, just
I
having a
guarantee
good
you,
conversation.
We're looked at all the same way. I mean,
Right.
we look at each other differently. When growing up for me, it was my hair, it was this, it was that. I mean, there's always a distinguishing factor when in actuality, when the mainstream society looks at us,
It's all the same.
we're all the same. Yes, ma'am.
I'm 71 years old.
You look great.
Wow.
So when I hear Jalen having the same issues that I had 40 years ago, it's sad. Because, at my age, I was the first Black in a whole lot of things. And a lot of times, not only the only Black, but the only female. So, and to see that the same thing is still happening today, it's heartbreaking. And when we talk about, are we fighting policies or are we fighting practice, we're fighting both. Because the policies are one thing, but the practice is something totally different. People can put on paper, we're going to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in practice, they're not doing that. And from a political standpoint, pay attention to everything. The 2020 census was the very first time there were less white people than there were other minorities. It was a decrease. They are freaking out. And those policies and practices that they are putting in place, trying to ensure their power when they become the minority, is something that we, in every level that we are in, we have to look out for that, and we have to be on guard for that, and we have to fight against that every single step of the way.
But the way we fight against that is by executing some degree of unity. That's it. It's not anybody going out protesting, burning up anything. It's real simple. And that's the thing. It's not complicated. It's not electing somebody. It's not creating another. It's basic. I have to see me in you. You have to see yourself in me. And in that, there's a level of respect. There's a level of support. There's a level of commitment that will supersede all of that. You know, if you're in an environment, again, speaking up and speaking out, you got to be able to support that person. If like you said, Mark, when all those people were going to walk out, you know, I mean, you had that support. That's a support that we have to extend to everybody, whether or not it's somebody we know. I mean, based on the principle behind it, and that's what we don't do enough. I don't want to say we don't do it, because there are those of us who try to do it.
Yeah.
We don't do it enough. I mean, I referenced something in one of my columns, and it was, in my opinion, misunderstood, but I had to respect that misunderstanding. And the Jewish community was livid. And I kept reading, I was like, I didn't see it, but I had to respect the fact that they found it offensive. But that was comprehensive. It was across the board. Now, I got text messages from black people saying, Karen, I understand, blah, blah, blah. I got inbox messages, whatever. But I had a friend who was Jewish. He was the only person that publicly said, hey, I know Karen. She's my friend. She didn't do it. Now, did nobody speak up because they were afraid? They didn't want to get attacked either? But it's little stuff like that that makes the difference, that will continue to make the difference. It didn't sound complicated, but don't send me an inbox message. These people were ripping me a new one on Twitter. Say something.
Yeah, to relate to that, I wrote a column, that the Free Press article I referenced. I got over 2,000 comments. And I didn't say anything. People who read the article, it was interesting. A lot of the white folks who read the article, I'm talking about the hardcore right-wingers, right? They will let me have, he's crying racism. I said, that's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. I was talking about the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I went back and I started reading all these comments. I said, I can't read anymore. Because people are just, they misconstrue.
But people are angry too.
There are a lot of angry people.
And they see it through their lens without consideration that everybody, you know, your perch determines your perspective. From where we sit determines how we see things and see each other and see ourselves. But we have to give everybody else and say, okay, I mean, you don't see that, but I can respect it.
But I also think this, you make a wonderful comment, and pay attention to Florida. Pay attention to Florida.
Georgia as well.
Yeah, and what you're saying is I'm not going to repeat what's happening in Florida. You guys know what's happening in Florida, but these are people, they just, to Karen's point, they want to see it through their lens only. And by seeing something through a certain lens, guess what? You separate everything else that's happened, but you don't want to see that. That's a bunch of BS. And so if we're not careful, Florida, not to turn this into a political situation, but there's a great example where this whole woke comment, it's like, woke? Why is that becoming negative all of a sudden? People are trying to politicize it. But Florida is trying to whitewash some things that are happening in our history, and they don't want to be taught in the classroom. And I'm telling you, I'm an instructor. When you go in my classroom, we're going to talk about it. We talk about black and white issues in my classroom, and my students love it. And I give them the real deal, and I think, Karen, gets to your point where I tell my students when they come into my classroom that you are in a safe zone. You are in a safe zone. We can disagree, but we're going to disagree respectfully. So I think the whole Florida situation, I would just encourage all of us just to pay attention to what's going on in Florida.
Okay, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to just simply say that in hearing these comments, right, like I think social construct, right, and like it's important to pay attention to who's sharing the narrative. So whatever comment you posted, I'm not that savvy on social media, and if I'm posting anything, I'm going off, but in order to pay attention to like who is combating. So when we think about, don't know this gentleman's name, Kelly Garrett's husband, the have and the have-nots, right? And even there being this gap here of age and not seeing a change, I think about like who is continuously feeding that narrative, and we have to remember again who wants to keep the thumb on this country, right? And have a pulse of like what is being shared and or not shared, and really like kind of feeling this embodiment of that have and have not. I'm not sure, I have friends from the King homes, right? And I'm not sure if I walk in that space, if they're like, oh, you made it out, like, there's a different narrative that's being told elsewhere to them when they're walking into spaces where they are requesting services, right? Department of Health and Human Services. Well, if you do these things, then you could achieve this. And so, of course, like we all have this definitive message in our mind of what success looks like. And so when we see something that resembles success, and again, that's closely tied to white supremacy, right? We begin to, again, further that gap. So I would encourage, and at least something that I do is much like I'm sure many of us, we look back and we try to pull forward, but it's also reminding like, yes, this is my personal narrative and I had to achieve these things to get here, but also understand like I'm willing to help you along the way and like try to create white noise when you're hearing this other narrative that's coming from the individuals trying to keep a thumb on the pulse.
I know we're almost out of time. I don't know if there are any other questions, but I want to get your 2 seconds. I want to get your reparations. Like, what should Black people be asking for? I mean, we look at what happened with Barry's Beach, and now we've got a commission in the city of Detroit that said we want to find a way to compensate Black people in the city of Detroit outside of a lump sum of money. Okay, we're going to give you job opportunities, and isn't that what we're supposed to be getting anyway? But just quickly, what is your take on reparations, or what should, if anything, Black people be looking for, asking for, or expecting?
I think it's a holistic approach. So I think money, I think, resources that lead to an education in some space, home ownership, things that historically have not been as easily accessible to us.
Okay. Mark?
I think we also have to be very careful about when we say we want money, because I think honestly it's us paying it out of our taxes, so we're paying ourselves reparations. It's a cycle. So I think people have to be very careful about that. And that was one thing, because I have worked for Detroit City Council before, and I know some council members felt that we needed reparations, but the only way you're going to get reparations is through tax dollars.
But see, it sounds good, and everybody gets emotional.
But you're paying yourself, and I think a lot of people have to be just mindful of that. And I think we owe it to them to at least know that that's how you're going to get your money back, if you ever get your money back. But I think, like what Amani said, we need to be mindful of the things that are hard for us to attain, and then hard for us to keep as well.
All right.
We can get home ownership, but I think it's hard for the Black or African American population to maintain home ownership.
Because that we haven't been taught
Right.
that disconnect. I mean, we talk a lot about business ownership. People have a business card and they have a talent, but they have no business acumen, and that undermines any talent that they have. And I know we're getting into a little bit different, but that's part of the equation. People say, do better. What does better look like? Like, we've not collectively taught others what better is and how to do better. Okay, what does that mean? Krista, what is your take on reparations?
It's an exhaustive list that I
Okay.
can't even begin or end.
Okay.
I will say, though, if there were to be, because we are seeing this in other places, a tax base, right? Like understanding, like, historically how displaced Black persons have been in this country, how we migrated over, right? We were not seen as colonists,
Right.
but enslaved. Begin with actually offering us land. No tax. We are all, and I say this softly with my head down, we are actually all slaves in this country when we're continuing to pay tax on land
true.
that is not ours.
That
we
you
think
don't
we
own.
own
You're
something.
absolutely right.
We don't own not a damn thing, right?
That's true. Not even the house. I forgot what that's called, but you own the house, but you don't own the land that it's on. I forgot what it was, but yeah, so we think we do. Okay, Mark, quickly, and then I'm going to take this slate.
Economic development,
Okay.
inclusion, educational attainment, home ownership.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for bringing up reparations, because that was one of my questions for the panel. But when it does come to reparations, the money that's going to Ukraine are your tax dollars. And I see that happening, and the Indians receive reparations, the Japanese receive reparations. This is not a handout. It is something that is due to the descendants of chattel slavery. It was happening in California. They're going by delineation. I want to know what you guys think about delineation, and what that is a particular group, the descendants of slaves, having their own group in Michigan. I hear a lot of you say people of color. I'm not a person of color. I'm a descendant of chattel slavery from the United States. So I'm not in, when you say women, that's diversity, that's minority. We are a separate group. Only this separate group has faced injustices. When you say people of color, I think of Dearborn. I think of Indians. I think of who've received reparations, who just received an additional $1 million for treaties and things like that. So I do believe reparations is happening. California is doing the blueprint for everybody to follow. So I'm excited about it. I went on a reparations call a couple months ago, actually the first day of Black History Month, and it was very progressive. And it was very informative. So I tell everyone in this room, if you are a descendant of slave, you need to be involved in reparations, because that is the way economically for the descendant of slaves to have an input and to have a blueprint going forward, because we are being erased. Not only we are being erased economically, but our history. Thank you.
But we also want to make sure that when that happens, that we know what to do with it. Like I said, you look at Berry's Beach. They went through all of that to return this land to this family, and they turned around and sold it back. It's like, okay, so what are we doing? Because we've not been taught what you talked about land. I mean, Bill Gates is buying up tons of land in the United States. I mean, we trivialize, we don't want to be on a farm. We don't want to do. Here is a value. So we're wrapping up. I want to respect everybody's time. So closing comments. What do we do from here? Like, what makes a difference? And I don't mean, we say we got to vote for people, we got to do that. But leave the audience with some kind words, call to action, something they can put in their pocket and take with them on their way this evening and going forward.
I think a lot of it starts at home. Mm-hmm. When I think about my experience in school, kids are mean. And we grow up comparing ourselves to other people and, putting other people down. And those same kids are, my age now and raising their own kids who I'm sure are doing the same things. So it's a very systemic issue. And I think it really starts at home in the way that your parents raise you. So I would say, focus on your family and your village.
Okay. And being an example for kids that even aren't yours. I hate to hear when I hear older people, Black people afraid of younger Black people. You don't have to be afraid of them. Speak to them. Look them in the eye. That's part of it, too. Just because you didn't give birth to them doesn't mean that they're not our children. Mark.
Can I just say it so I can get it out of my head? Okay.
Oh, now you want to talk, Jalen. Okay, go ahead.
No, 'cause then you're going to have me forget.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So I think I wanted to kind of go back off the term of don't gatekeep your information. I think that's what Black people or delineants, however you want to call it, how we do not share our information, or we don't work hard enough to share what we all think we should collectively fight for. And I'm just happen to be looking this way. But I'm just saying, I think as a whole, I think we could start to share more information about the things that we should be working together or working in unity with each other about. I think sometimes we just honestly don't know a lot of the things that we should be fighting for collectively. I think that's a big issue in our community. So,
Great.
There we go.
As a multicultural, multi-makeup individual, the best thing that I can do is continue to listen in spaces and leverage my voice in a sense of allyship, because I recognize my privilege in many spaces when I'm around Black persons.
Okay.
Communicate, engage, stay involved, and unify.
And on Jalen's note, somebody told me once, information, access, resources, if you hold it like this, it'll seep through your hands like sand. But if you open it up, out of not fear that somebody else will have it. It'll sit right there and it won't move. So we have to do that. My closing comments are that we need to move from filling a seat of self to fulfilling a seat for all. We need to have more we and less me, and that we need to stop seeking or settling for attention and acknowledgement over accomplishments. We got too much. We got folks, all I hear is like, this what I don't, okay. Let's focus on the substantive, and choosing a position over progress or money over momentum. That's my 2 cents. All right, let's give our distinguished panel a round of applause. Mark S. Lee, Jalen Jennings, Amani Johnson, Krista McClure, and Nancy Quarles that had to leave, and also our mayor, Kelly Garrett, for pulling this together. Are you closing out comments? No? Yes? No?
You can keep going.
Okay, no, because I know Kelly's not here, and if you have some closing comments. Oh, you're going to close out. Okay, well, you close out, sir. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Karen. Give Karen a round of applause. Hey.
Kelly wanted me to thank you all for coming. She felt like this is much needed. She think the next step would be as if we could come together and come up with one like overarching goal that we feel like if we're going to move the needle, that we come together and decide to do. Because, these conversations, do happen. And unfortunately, these conversations happen, and then nothing happens afterward. You might have a few meetings, you might have a few, let's come together and talk and rah, rah, rah. But you have not had where we come together and says, what would be one significant thing that if we did would move the needle, and then commit to doing that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.